Hey, welcome to Double Back for Ammo. My name is Dan. If you've ever visited this channel before or visited my Twitter, then you know that I believe that Elden Ring is one of the best recent video games of all time. It is my favorite FromSoftware game. Honestly, I haven't played them all. I played Bloodborne, I've played Dark Souls 3, I've played some of the Demon Souls remake. Elden Ring tops them all, in my opinion. One of the things that happens while you're playing Elden Ring is that even though you're playing very much in a present tense setting, there are lots of clues about what happened in the Lands Between for the 5,000 years before you return to the Lands Between as a Tarnished. Many content creators on YouTube try to piece out this period of history that occurred before the events of the game Elden Ring. What they tend to do with their individual videos is they take like one faction of the game, or they take one event that happened in the game, and they sort of go into that in detail. But my question, even after all these years, after 2 years after the game came out, is how does it all tie together? What is the complete story? And I don't think that anybody has really gone through and given a complete timeline of Elden Ring, at least not based on the criteria that I would like to. So as you can see here, I've been putting together in my spare time a little timeline of the history of Elden Ring. And so let's kind of see over here at the start, like this goes basically from eternity, the time unknowable before the creation of the Elden Ring universe, and goes all the way through all the events that occurred and all the way up to the rise of the Tarnished. So we'll get through all this right up to the moment that Elden Ring starts. I'd like to kind of go through what I have for you today and see if it rings any bells for you. So one thing that a lot of us who play Elden Ring know is that the history of Elden Ring was written by George R.R. Martin, who also wrote A Song of Ice and Fire, the novels that the show Game of Thrones on HBO were based on. In his partnership with FromSoftware, he stated, I think this was on the Stephen Colbert show, that he went back and wrote a history of what happened 5,000 years before the current game, and who all the characters were, who was killing each other, what powers they had. All right, so I wanted to piece all this together, kind of like Charlie Day in the Charlie Day meme. And also, you know, as we explore this little timeline I've put together, I would like for you to put on your Elden Ring style tinfoil hat. I want you to wear your Nox mirror helm. I want you to ward off intervention of the greater will and other voices, and just try to be open-minded about what I'm presenting to you here, okay? All right, so another thing I threw at the front here is the description, part of the description of the law of causality. This is an incantation in the game, and the description describes causality as the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation. And that's what I'd like to do. I think that's what Goldmask was trying to do. Link all things in a chain of relation, cause and effect. And that's how this timeline that I've created approaches Elden Ring, as opposed to some other timelines or some other lore videos that I've seen. All right, so let's start off in the long ago, before any of these events happened. There was eternity, the unknowable, unfathomable events that happened before the creation of the universe. This entire section of the timeline is a time of mythology. It's basically what people made up to explain the creation of the universe. And from one of the NPCs in the game, we get an account of the One Great. And this comes from Hyetta. She says that all there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures and births and souls. That's just part of what she says, but I think that that's the important part that mentions the One Great. According to Hyetta, the One Great fractured and kind of like in sort of like a Big Bang event, and then we got all these other outer gods, the Formless Mother, the Greater Will, the Rock God, and the God of the Flame of Frenzy. Either the Flame of Frenzy itself is the god, or there was perhaps like a chaos god, the God of Chaos maybe, that's behind the Flame of Frenzy. We also have mentions of other potential outer gods, but it's not confirmed that they are outer gods or just entities. There is the Blood Star. There is the god of the twin bird being the mother of all the death birds. And then there is possibly the Dark Moon, because this is that was like almost like Rani's outer god. It's something that Rani sort of uses in her magic, and we can't and it's almost like a source of power that powers some of her spells. And also we see the Dark Moon in her ending. So is it an outer god? It's kind of a question. A lot of Elden Ring doesn't verify much of any of this for you. And we do have the DLC coming up, and I've sort of written some of the events that were presented in the DLC into the timeline. You'll see that later. And then we also had the Fell God, who was the god of the fire giants. It's possible that the Blood Star could be another form of the Formless Mother. To those who don't understand that they are one and the same, they may describe them differently. So when the fracture of the One Great occurred, it's also very possible that that's when there were creations of worlds bearing life. Because it seems like after that, after there was already the lands between, the Greater Will sent the Elden Beast to the lands between. And for evidence, I go to the Remembrance of the Elden Beast. And part of the description says that it said long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. It was the vassal beast of the Greater Will and the living carnation of the concept of order. When the Elden Beast gets to the lands between, it selects an Empyrean. I mean, that's what usually happens, right? And in Farum Azula, one of the oldest civilizations and oldest structures in the lands between, we do see a depiction of the Elden Ring at that ancient time. It looks different than it looks in the current day. And we'll sort of go into those changes. I might be able to bring up another page. But beneath the Elden Ring, we see a statue of a young woman, a young humanoid-looking woman, surrounded by lone wolves. Looks basically like the lone wolf ashes, the first ashes. Well, maybe the first ashes that you receive in the game when you receive the spirit calling bell from Rani. You could get I think the fanged imp ashes before that if you select them on the character creation screen. Anyway, I think, this one is green because it's a big maybe, right? Did it select an Empyrean, or did it just select an Elden Lord? So what happens at some point, the Elden Beast takes the form of the Elden Ring. And that's how it's represented throughout, as we saw in Farum Azula and for the rest of history. So one of two things happened. This first Empyrean, or the Elden Beast, selected Placidusax, a giant dragon, as the first of the Elden Lords. We can actually find and defeat Placidusax in Farum Azula, kind of in a hidden area. And his remembrance states that he was the Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time, is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return. So that's that's a lot of info, but it's still very vague. That's what we get throughout Elden Ring, is these vagaries that we have to try to tie together. And that's where my little timeline comes from. So there's one of two possibilities here, and I've got one possibility charted out here. The Elden Beast arrived in the lands between, selected an Empyrean who might have been the little girl we saw, then took the form of the Elden Ring and became and merged with that vassal, that little girl, and then selected Placidusax as first Elden Lord. That's a possibility, right? The other possibility is that the Elden Beast just remained the Elden Beast and was the god who was fled, that is mentioned in the Remembrance, and literally works side by side with Placidusax. Because if you fight Placidusax, you literally see Placidusax use some of the same breath attacks that the Elden Beast learns. So either the Elden Beast took them from Placidusax, or Placidusax learned them directly from the Elden Beast. I think perhaps the Elden Beast was the Empyrean at first, and that it basically selected Placidusax to be the first Elden Lord. I think it was a very different kind of system in prehistoric times, but also I think we lack a lot of information about this mythological age to really bring it home, right? To really prove it. All right, so then the next major event that happened in history is that beasts and giants and other creatures of the age grew opposable thumbs. This was hailed as the dawn of intelligence, and it's mentioned in the description of a weapon called the Cincadea, if I'm saying that correctly. Cinque, of course, means five in Latin and several languages, and the Cincadea appears to have five fingers on it. As it says in the description, the design celebrates a beast's five fingers, symbolic of the intelligence once granted upon their kind. This is the dawn of intelligence and possibly, recorded history. And it's during this time that we have burial by the twin birds or by the deathrite birds, and the death birds. There is a shield you can find featuring a vividly painted twin bird. This is called the twin bird shield. The twin bird is said to be the envoy of an outer god and mother of the death birds. So potentially there's an outer god of death, or maybe it's the greater will. Maybe that's who the twin bird is the envoy of at one point. So this is what was going on at the same time, and that's why I stacked these little sticky notes together. So after beasts and giants grow their opposable thumbs, that was when we have the building of the ancient relics, the ancient structures that we see in Elden Ring. We would have the building of Farum Azula, the building of the Beast Sanctuary, where we find Gurranq in Caelid, and also the building of the six divine towers. All of these structures share the same kind of architecture. They're all made out of giant pieces of stone that are put in place probably by giants, since giants are found in the mountaintops of the giants, and they're found, like the remains of giants are found in Caelid. I think that the giants helped the beasts in building. They would lift huge stone blocks and put them in place, and then the beasts would use tools with their five opposable fingers, or with their opposable thumbs and their five fingers, to carve those stone blocks to become the divine towers, Farum Azula, and the Beast Sanctuary, and the ruins that we find of those places today. That's what I believe. The divine towers, of course, also include pieces of meteorite. I think that those pieces of meteorite that we find in the divine towers are from the meteor site where the Elden Beast crash landed into the planet. I think that's how it arrived. It arrived from outer space. And the outer gods, the term outer gods, literally comes from H.P. Lovecraft, from the lore of H.P. Lovecraft. Most of the outer gods dwell in outer space or in alternate dimensions, in unfathomable places. And we find that in Elden Ring. There's a lot of mention of other worlds, invading other worlds, being invaded by an invader from another world. So I think it all coalesces, and we'll pull that together later. All right, so after the building of all the ancient structures, we find that humans are actually depicted in Farum Azula. There are some sculptures that actually show like kings, this queen carrying this child, and this what looks like maybe a chancellor or a sorcerer of old, depicted in Farum Azula. So where did human beings come from? If this was a prehistoric period of time, did they just evolve like with the rest of the life, like at the same time as the dragons? It's possible that they might have evolved from the ancient dragons taking human form. There is a race selection on the character creation screen that allows you to become a draconian. And those draconians are described as the people of the ancient dragons, among whom life is typically short. And further on in the timeline, we're going to see that there are mentions of dragons taking human form, very late in the timeline, in fact. So stay tuned for that. But there is also the Northerner, who is said to be, some say they're descended from giants. So is it possible that, breeding between the Draconians and the giants may have, hopefully some of the shorter giants, may have led to the creation of the human race in the lands between. The lands between is also the home of the arrival point of a race called the Newman. The Newman are also humanoids. They are supposed descendants of denizens of another world. So there it is, mention of another world. They are long-lived but seldom born. Later on, it's mentioned that Marika, the queen who rules over the Golden Order and takes prominent place in most of Elden Ring's history, and also the god that we are meant to kill at the end of Elden Ring. She descends from the Newmans. She's from the Newmans, and so are people from the Nox, the Night Cities. So we'll get into that. All right, so based on the ruins that we find in several places in Elden Ring, there was an ancient dynasty that was founded. The architecture of this dynasty is very Greek. We find a lot of these structures in a place called the Ul Palace ruins, which are on the surface. There's also the Old Palace ruins, which are underground, I believe. Or maybe I've got them switched. I have to go back into the game to figure that out for sure. But they're very Greek looking in architecture, and among them, we have got statues, giant statues of this man. We don't know who this man is, but this man has a very long beard, and also this person, very long arms, and he's also holding a tablet. And then at his feet is another tablet. And also, from under his robes, I mean, maybe it's difficult to see, but there are, here, I'll draw on them just to kind of highlight them. But there are roots coming down out of his robes. You can see them descending out of his robes. So why would this person, that make it a little difficult for this guy to walk? I think what this statue is trying to depict over and over again is that this person was a person of great importance in the ancient dynasty. I have no doubt of that, in fact. What we don't understand is who this guy was or what he prophesied. But with these roots coming down out of his robes, we have a feeling that he may have been the one who prophesied that, or basically mandated to society that a great tree needed to be grown. And the great tree would feature prominently in the burial rituals of the lands between. And we get evidence of this from a couple of artifacts that there would have been a great tree separate from the Erd tree. For example, root resin. We find root resin at the base of trees throughout the lands between and in some other places, and also in the catacombs. This is resin secreted from the roots of the great tree. It's all one word in the English version. Can also be found near trees on the surface. The roots of the great tree were once linked to those of the Erd tree, or so they say. So the roots of the great tree were linked to those of the Erd tree, and the Erd tree is the tree that's grown later that we can still see when we first enter the land between. It's that huge golden tree. But there was also a great tree, a separate tree that came before the Erd tree, most likely. And then down at the bottom, and it is for this reason, catacombs are built around great tree roots. So every time we go through a catacomb, the catacombs are almost like these puzzles. You find these catacombs that go deep into the earth, and deep within the earth, you have to find a means of which to open the main burial chamber. And within the main burial chamber, you typically find a boss. And once you defeat the boss or bosses, at the back of the chamber, you will see a bunch of roots at the back of the chamber. This is the chamber where you see a bunch of bodies being absorbed into these roots. According to what this is saying, those are the great tree roots, which are connected to the Earth tree, once linked to the Earth tree, not linked anymore. Maybe they're not linked anymore. We don't know. This is supported by the description of the map of the deep root depths. The deep root depths lie directly beneath the capital of Lanedale, where the great tree was grown from. So the great tree is literally, actually the Erd tree is literally depicted on the map. And if you toggle between the lower depths and the upper depths, you can literally see the Erd tree growing up to the surface from the deep root depths. The description of this item says, at the very depths of the Erd tree's majestic roots lies the source of the Ansel and the Siofra rivers. Here too begins the network of great tree roots that spread throughout the lands between. Again, the Erd tree and the great tree mentioned in the same item description. They are two different things. So where is this great tree? I think I have an idea. I have a theory anyway. Put on your Nox Mirror helm and just open your mind to go on this journey with me. So after this person, who we don't know his name, mandated that there was a need to grow a great tree for the funerary rites of the time, that was the beginning of the Crucible era, because they had to try to figure out how to combine various forms of life to grow a larger tree. And I believe that their aim was to try to grow this larger tree in the same period of time that it takes to grow a regular tree, which is about 30 to 40 Earth years. It's possible that trees grow faster in the lands between. I mean, it's a different world, right? So, and it's also possible that the growth of a tree could be enhanced or accelerated through the use of magic and also through the use of blood, as we find out later. So keep those things in mind. So, like, the Crucible era is verified through numerous item descriptions. This, like, for example, here is I think the tail of the Crucible. This incantation, this allows the user to just all of a sudden form a tail that you can use to sweep an area. And within this description of this incantation, as well as several other Crucible incantations, we find this part. This is a manifestation of the Erd tree's primal vital energies, an aspect of the primordial Crucible, where all life was once blended together. And from the Crucible, we get a lot of things. The Crucible era, we get the catacombs are built near the great tree roots, and yeah, here's my shock at figuring out that the great tree was absorbing these bodies from the catacombs. That's why you were burying people in catacombs, so that they could be absorbed by the Erd tree, and the Erd tree would grow bigger as a result of this. And so, like, I think, like, sometime at the same time, we also had the building of Ul Palace and Old Palace. I think Ul Palace somehow winds up below the ground. Like, part of this old ancient dynasty winds up being driven beneath ground or knocked beneath ground. And then another part of this society, you can still see, like, there's called, I think it's like one of the sites of Grace near it, call it the Labyrinth. It's in the northeastern part of Liurnia, and we can go to a map if we need to. If you go to the map, you'll see the area, but basically you see a bunch of, like, here's a photo from that area on the surface where we see this individual again, statues of this individual, and also Greek ruins of temples and whatnot, pillars fallen over. All these things are there to show that society was built on the surface, but was later driven underground. And part of that area that we see underground is Night's Sacred Ground. I have a feeling that it probably once had another name, but now that it's part of the Night Cities, the Eternal Cities, I think now it's called Night's Sacred Ground. But if you go look at that area, what you see is the same architecture that we find in the Ul Palace and the Old Palace in the Ainsel and Siofra River areas underground. All right, so that dynasty takes probably like 40 years to grow the great tree, if they grow it well. If giving the bodies to the roots helps it to grow, and those practices are established for a long time. We then have a cosmic event happen. Basically, the other outer gods, and possibly another outer god that we haven't identified, commence a celestial war against the lands between, because they know that the Elden Beast, the vassal of the Greater Will, went to the lands between. And so meteors begin striking the lands between. And one of those meteors strikes Farum Azula. And that's why we see it in the state it's in. So a lot of people kind of debate, was Farum Azula always in the sky? Or was it driven into the sky by the impact of a meteor? I don't believe so. I believe that Farum Azula always existed in the air. That it was basically the power of Placidusax and those tornadoes that held it aloft. but I do think it was hit by a meteor, and that meteor could maybe have damaged Placidusax. The damage is throughout Far Missoula, as you can clearly see. I think during this time is when the Estelles arrive. There is, of course, the boss Estelle, and from its remembrance, we learn that it is a malformed star born in the flightless void far away, once destroyed an eternal city and took away their sky, a falling star of ill omen. So the Ansel ruins, where we find a lot of the ruins of either Old or Old Palace, we find one of these creatures, a smaller, easier to kill version of an Estelle. And we also find another one of these creatures deep below the Altus Plateau in a series of caves that kind of connect closely together. Anyway, there's at least 3 of those creatures that arrived on the Earth through meteor strikes. And this is also the period of time where the Onyx Lords arrive. So you can find like meteor sites in various caves and catacombs, and the Onyx Lords will emerge from a portal to fight you. And this celestial war is going on to this day, I believe. There are places in like the Weeping Peninsula, for example, where you go and you find a meteor like right out in the open, and an Onyx Lord emerges from it and attacks you. There's another one right outside the capital of Leyendell. I think a beast, one of those, the Star Beast or whatever it's called, has those 2 giant horns. I forget what that boss is called, but you find that at the site of a meteor crash right outside the capital. So it's still going on to this day. The other outer gods, this outer god of the Estelles, is throwing meteors at the planet in order to try to usurp the greater will, to overthrow the greater will. So after around this time that the meteor strikes Far Missoula, I believe some of the ancient dragons, fled from Far Missoula to the mountaintops of the giants. They either became or eventually evolved into the ice dragons. We find one of those ice dragons there to this day. It's hidden at first. You don't see it. But then all of a sudden, it's almost like a snowstorm blows in and this dragon attacks you, and it's an ice dragon. So I think we defeat the last of the ice dragons in Elden Ring. But anyway, they fled to the mountaintops of the giants in the north and immediately came into friction with the fire giants. And that may have lasted a while, or it may have been a short period of friction. Around the same time, I believe, is when Placidusax God or Empyrean fled. I think that is easy. It's after the meteor strikes, and this is just very vague about this god fleeing. We don't know whether it's referring to an Empyrean who was chosen by the Elden Beast, who then, like this girl who's depicted over here in Far Missoula, like is she the one who fled? Do we not see her anymore? Or is it the Elden Beast itself at this point transforming itself into the Elden Ring? I think it would have had to have happened before, because the Elden Ring is literally carved into Far Missoula. But one thing I will say about Far Missoula is that you do see Deathroot everywhere, like in many places in Far Missoula. And Deathroot is a result of a recent event, the Shattering War, right? It's caused by Godfrey, the death of, no, not Godfrey, Godwyn, the death of Godwyn. And so how did it get there in Far Missoula? How did those roots get in there? So those tree roots growing through Far Missoula and then allowing Deathroot to grow in Far Missoula, I think that does counteract my theory that Far Missoula was always in the sky. I think at some point it was on the ground, and then maybe it was launched into the sky by Placidusax, or by his ability to stop time. And I think that this stopping of time made the dragons basically into an immortal race. I think that the Elden Beast is always looking for this trade-off. I will make you immortal as long as you worship me. I think that's what the Elden Beast is after. All right, so moving on. Back to when Placidusax God, or the Empyrean, fled. I think that this weakness in the system that had been developed of the Great Tree, the Elden Beast, and Placidusax as the Elden Beast Lord. I think that that weakness allowed for someone to destroy the great tree. And I have here an image of the other giant tree trunk that we find in the deeper depths. In front of this tree trunk, we find a crucible knight, one of the preeminent crucible knights, Siluria, a female knight, and basically one of the leaders of the crucible knights from the crucible area. She is guarding this tree trunk. And if we approach this tree trunk, it's a boss fight with her. And if we go inside the tree trunk, I think we find the crucible armor set, like her armor set is like, or a copy of her armor set is inside this tree, but it's hollow on the inside. What was this tree? Why is a crucible knight here guarding it century after century? Why is this so important? I think this might be the tree stump of the great tree. And there's these other branches growing off of it, right? There's even like this little branch growing off here and these branches growing off here. I think that that indicates what happens next. So next off, we have the rise of the two fingers, right? Because power abhors a vacuum. So clearly, I think at this point, the Elden Beast is not communicating with anyone. The Elden Beast is now definitely full-time taken the form of the Elden Ring. And the Elden Ring must be possessed by a vassal. At this point, that vassal is either fled or that vassal hasn't been decided. So we have the rise of the two fingers. I think the two fingers are created by magic means, or I think they're possibly grown, like almost like plant life or fungus life. Because if you look at them, I mean, that's kind of what they look like. They look like giant fungus. They don't have bones inside the fingers. They just decay. They almost look like fungal in nature, and they have these little hairs growing off them. They're pretty disgusting. But anyway, there is the rise of this culture of having the two fingers espouse the greater will, since the greater will can no longer speak to people directly. I think around this time that the people of the night people, or the Nox, formerly, the people who are still dwelling in the old palace ruins, I believe that they are driven underground by the greater will because they refuse to accept the two fingers. You don't find any two fingers in the undergrounds. The only one you find is beneath Manus Celis Cathedral, and that's Ronnie's two fingers. They're hidden down there, but possibly hiding from Ronnie in that location. I don't know, but she knew exactly where they were, so that's probably not true. I think around this time that the Crucible Knights are formed too, because the Crucible Knights serve Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. So I think at this point, Godfrey is quite possibly alive. And I think that the two fingers name new Empyreans. And because of what happens in the present day with the two fingers naming multiple Empyreans, I think we had multiple Empyreans back then too, and I'll go into that. I think quite possibly it was Marika and Melina. And I think Marika and Melina were either sisters or that Melina was Marika's first daughter. And I hope that we find out more about that in the Erd Tree, the Shadow of the Erd Tree DLC. I think that would be great. Yeah, so it was they were driven underground. The people of the Nox were driven underground because they didn't want to accept the two fingers, and they created the two fingers blade, the item that Ronnie later sends us. This is the hidden treasure of the eternal city of Nokron, a blade said to have been born of a corpse. So this is quite possibly born from somebody's corpse. Is Godwin's maybe? I don't know. I think that's too present day. I think that the creation of this is what caused the heresy against the greater will that caused the greater will to drive them underground. This blood-drenched fetish is proof of the high treason committed by the eternal city and symbolizes its downfall. Cannot be wielded by those without a faith, but is said to be able to harm the greater will and its vassals, the two fingers, which we see later in Ronnie's storyline. All right, so I threw this event in here. Someone beats Placidusax. He loses two of its four heads. right? That either happens. Either somebody beats Placidus X, like maybe Godfrey. We don't know that for sure though. Or maybe it's the meteor that strikes Farm Azula that causes this damage to Placidus X. And because of the damage it receives, it Placidus X then seals crumbling Farm Azula in time. It's floating now out over the ocean and far to the east. It's sealed in time. The dragons are immortal, and I think Placidus X goes into a long sleep to keep Farm Azula afloat, and also to keep the dragons eternal. But however, the dragons are no longer the favored creatures of the Elden Ring and the Elden Beast. That moves now to the human beings. So I think Marika and Melina were named Empyreans by the two fingers. And I think that the naming of two is probably what provoked Marika to become a little competitive and say, I want to be the Empyrean. I want to be the Queen Eternal. I want to be the one in charge. So I think that Marika, of all the Empyreans who are named, becomes the vessel of the Elden Ring. Malekith is given to Marika as a shadow. He was originally a beast from the Beast Kingdom. He probably originates in crumbling Farm Azula. And he takes over that giant palace where we fight him toward the end of the game. But he is Marika's shadow. He is a creature like a vassal given to an Empyrean to enforce her will. And so I think that happened at that period of time when she became named Vessel of the Elden Ring. She then takes on the Elden Ring. Her champion in this process, Horalu, a chieftain of the Badlands, takes the name Godfrey, and Godfrey and his men, and then Marika names Godfrey Elden Lord. Sometime shortly after that, Godfrey and his men build the fortified manor in the area that will become known as Landelb. I think they build it there so that they can protect the growing of the Erd Tree, because Marika, one of the first things she did, according to a lot of item descriptions and a lot of dialogue snippets we get from Melina, is that she mandated establishing the Golden Order, growing the Erd Tree as the new tree to replace the destroyed Great Tree. A new order for her new world. Based on what we see in the DLC, at some point, or based on the interviews that we've read with the game's creator Miyazaki, Marika seals off the part of the lands between where she first set foot. That's what the Shadowlands are described as in Shadow of the Erd Tree. So I think we have here the creation in the Shadow Realm by Marika. So think about that. She's the vassal of a god. She has the powers of a god now. She can seal off an entire continental area so that nobody can get to it anymore. Nobody can see what's there. And I think what's there might be Marika's history. And I think that we'll find out more about Marika when we get the Shadow of the Erd Tree, and that'll be cool. We're also going to find out about one of her unwanted children, of which there are a lot, apparently. So what happens to the other Empyreans when Marika is named Empyrean? I think that this is when the Godskin apostles are created by the second Empyrean. Does that mean that Melina, her sister, became or her first daughter became the Glomide Queen? I think so. And I think that because the Godskin apostles, if you look at them, they either like stretch upward like snake men, or they have the tail like the Crucible incantations. They are creations of the Crucible era. So we're still in the Crucible era. Somebody's still using Crucible magic, which would later be deemed heretical, and nobody would use Crucible magic anymore. So somebody was using Crucible magic to create the Godskins. And they were being created in Farm Azula and in other ancient places. We see, like, at the base of the tower, the Divine Tower, where in Caelid, we find Godskins protecting the weapon of this Glomide Queen, this giant greatsword that uses the Flame of Death. So I think that that's when this started. I think the Godskins and the Glomide Queen basically were the first challenge to Marika's new realm. But Meanwhile, I believe, like down in the deeper depths, that saplings were being grafted to the great tree trunk. And if you look at the great tree, I think you can see some of these other saplings, like this one and this back here, these giant roots. Uh, these stem from the great tree and they go upward, but there's also these new branches from the base. So I think that these show that saplings were grafted onto the great tree. And so grafting at that point would become kind of a sacred practice in the lands between. And that's why I think we have grafting go on later on. I think that's why Godfrey grafts that lion onto his back. I think that that's why, and that him doing the grafting as well, engaging in that sacred act is why people like Godefroy and Godric in the modern age also practice grafting. I believe that the experiments with grafting on the great tree made it a sacred act. So I believe that one of those saplings that was grafted to the great tree survived. And so all they did was sever it then after it grew up a bit, and then they planted it nearby where we encounter the base of the Erd tree later on. The base of the Erd tree, of course, is where we find the body of Godwin decomposing and also growing into that giant fish creature. We'll get into that later. All right, so with the age of the Erd tree beginning, then the Erd tree burial rites replace the death birds, but we still find the death birds around the lands between. But the twin death bird we don't encounter. And I think maybe Godfrey maybe went out and killed the twin bird if it was an actual creature. That was probably part of one of the early campaigns to spread the Erd tree and the Golden Order. I think that with the rise of the Erd tree and the Golden Order, that the Godskin apostles revolted. Once they had been grown up by the Glomide Queen, I think that the challenge began. The Godskin apostles revolt, and during that time, we see that there are fire monks who become black flame monks or join the Godskins. This is the Fell God. This is the sign of the Fell God on their chests, right? Because we see this on the chest of the fire giant too. So these fire monks clearly grew up in the north with the fire giants. They have the red hair. They're probably descended from the fire giants, and they practice the magic of the Fell God just like the fire giants do. Fire magic. These guys start practicing a different kind of magic, the black flame. And they dress a little different. They no longer have red hair. They've adopted white hair like the Godskin apostles, and also the white cloaks of the Godskin apostles. I believe that some of them defected to join the movement, the Godskin Apostle Revolt movement. During that revolt, that would have come to an end when Malekith defeated the Glomide Queen. Here's the great sword that we find in the Divine Tower below Caelid. This is a sacred sword of the Glomide Queen who controlled the Godskin Apostles before her defeat at the hands of Malekith. That's how we know Malekith defeated her. And then with Malekith's help, Marika removed the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. Because just like we saw with the dragons becoming eternal, the Elden Beast, the Elden Ring, wants to promise eternal life to the humans in the lands between now. And to do that, we have to remove the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring. And Malekith seals away the Rune of Death in the Black Blade, and he goes under her orders. He stays in Far Missoula so that nobody can find him and defeat him and claim the Black Blade and the Rune of Death from him. So yes, like I noted at this point, the lands between goes into this cycle of death and immortality, reviving its sites of grace. Everyone in the lands between does it. If you go to a site of grace and you rest, everybody you defeated comes back. Why is that? Same as you. When you are defeated, you come back at the last site of grace you visited, or at the last Marika statue. That is the power of Marika, using the sites of grace in her statues to revive people so that they reappear at those locations. Their former bodies possibly are still consumed by the great tree roots, which myth has it are connected to the Erd tree roots. So that's probably how the Erd tree is fed, through the old great tree roots. All right, so things up north go from bad to worse. The fire giants defeat the ice dragons who had settled there and evolved there. And then Marika and Godfrey ride north to fight the fire monks and definitely the fire junks, but possibly the fire monks too. So as the Golden Order settles in the north and begins attacking people, the fire monks and the trolls betray the fire giants and pledge their fealty to Marika and the Golden Order. And then it appears that they help defeat the fire giants, because when we find the fire monks in Liurnia, their camps are marked by these giant roots that that we see everywhere. And then over here, of course, like what we see in the mountaintops of giants is we see the corpses of the giants run through with these giant roots, just like the fire monks like to create. I think that these roots are created by the thorn magic of those who worship the blood star. And that's why I was talking later about how the fell god seems very related to the blood star. The blood star is seen by those who are blind, and it allows them to perform like thorn magic and blood magic, whereas the fire monks perform the magic of the fell god. It's an interesting combination. All right. And then we know that they march north from this sword monument in the mountaintops of the giants, which says the war against the giants, champions battle, trolls betray, fire vanquished, the era of the Erd Tree begins. So I originally had the beginning of the Erd Tree era like over here somewhere, but I think if you're going to go back to when the age of the Erd Tree begins, I think it's when a sapling begins to thrive. I think like history is written by the victors, right? So I think they would go back and look at that. All right, so with the defeat of the fire giants, Marika curses the last fire giant to tend to the forge of the giants forever. And we have that from as proof from his remembrance. If we go by what we say, Marika said, "O trifling giant, mayst thou tend thy flame for eternity." But the flame is clearly what burns down the Erd Tree at the end of the game. And I think that Marika's main reason for leading a campaign into the mountaintops of the giant was to secure the forge of the giants so that that flame could not be used against the Erd Tree. I think that they definitely saw the building of the forge of the giants as a threat to their Erd Tree. All right. So at this point, I think I question like when, like basically we have the address to the troops at the First Church of Marika. It's established in the mountaintops of the giants. We find this very late in the game. And according to Melina, this is when Melina addresses Godfrey and the troops and congratulates them all. I wonder if this is the point when Godfrey's soldiers' eyes begin to shine with grace, which will later dim and make them tarnished. So at this point, they are the Golden Army. And I think that this is the beginning of the Golden Age and the Age of Plenty. They raise the Erd Tree up in just a few years by it feeding on all the bodies that are fed to the Great Tree roots. And then I think that the building of Leyendell around the fortified manor begins. It's a much older structure, and then much newer structures are built around it. It's obvious in the architecture when you look at it. So with the beginning of the Golden lineage, Godwyn the Golden is born. He's the Golden Boy. He is the heir apparent, but he's never named Empyrean, so he can never take over for Marika. So Marika and Godfrey keep trying. And sometime during this period is when the twin omens, Morgott and Mohg, are born. And they're omens because they have those horns growing out of their head, which makes them akin to the misbegotten. And at this point, I think is because of their birth, you know, the omens bear marks of the crucible when all life is blended together. I think that this event basically caused Marika to turn around and say, well, crucible magic is heresy. We want people to stop performing crucible magic. I think this is when they began purging all other forms of magic in the lands between. The Golden Order had to be the only source of incantations, the Erd Tree the only source of worship. That's the order that the Greater Will wanted, and Marika carried that out. So crucible magic became heresy, and her omen twins and all the other omens born were sealed beneath Leyendell. Which I think that area is what probably one of the first areas of Leyendell that was built, and the omens were put down there, and then Leyendell continued building on top of that. I think the I think at some point during this time is when the three fingers and the great caravan were banished underground. And I base this on the ashes of the caravan, the great caravan member. I forget what that's called exactly. Maybe I should look it up. But this one describes a member of a tribe that was entombed in the earth so as to bury the maddening disease that followed them. Able to emit the terrible flame of frenzy from his eyes, but has low HP and is frail, unable to take much in the way of punishment. And that's what we find with the members of the Great Caravan that are still living, having gone mad underneath the Leyendell capital. Leyendell's dirty secrets are down there. This hat, if you can find the merchant's attire at one point in the game, and the hat is described as these merchants once thrived as the Great Caravan, but after being accused of heretical beliefs, their entire clan was rounded up and buried alive far underground. Then they chanted a curse of despair and summoned the flame of frenzy. That's when I think, so yeah, I think this age of kind of branding things heretical, I think that extended to the Three Fingers and the Great Caravan, and that's when they were driven underneath Leyendell. I think that driving these people down there near the roots of the Erd Tree, and also the birth of the omens, I think that drove a wedge between America and Godfrey. And I think that because of this, the Age of the Plenty ended. We see this from the one talisman that we get that describes that is a talisman depicting a drop of the Erd Tree's sap, a blessed boon. This talisman gradually restores your HP as a result. And it was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erd Tree would drip from its boughs forever, but that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erd Tree became more an object of faith. If you look closely, you can see a little drop of amber in here. That's what the Erd Tree drops. That's the Erd Tree's blessing, and that's what powers this talisman. Yeah, I think that at this point, after the birth of the omens and their disappointment, that Godwyn was not a new Empyrean who would take over for America. I think that based on everything else we read, that America and Godfrey kind of quietly separated, that there was a sad sort of sadness that came over their relationship. And I think that Godfrey left Leyendell to go pursue his fortunes elsewhere. And I think that him leaving Leyendell caused America to leave Leyendell, that she didn't want to be there by themselves. And I think that this event caused, remember the law of causality, I think this caused several events to happen almost at the same time. And I think that one causes the other. So I think that Godfrey leaving the capital, while he leaves the capital, there is mention of him fighting somebody called the Stormlord, which might be the Stormhawk King that we discover later at the ruins separated away from Stormvale Castle. Or it could be maybe the Stormlord refers to Placidusax, and maybe that's why we see the wounds on him. That's why when we find him sealed away, he's missing two of his heads. He's got wounds on his other necks. I think either that's what they're referring to as the Stormlord, because even Placidusax's remembrance states that he was the Lord out of time, that he was the Lord at the center of the storm, those kind of things. Or maybe the Stormlord is referring to the Stormhawk King, it's described as who would not bow to anyone, who would not be summoned by anyone. And because of that, that means that he's basically a rebel. And so I think that Godfrey went there and defeated him. If that's the case, if Godfrey defeated the Stormhawk King, then I think at that point he built himself a castle at Stormvale. I think that's how the castle at Stormvale was built. It has architecture and brickwork that is more familiar of the fortified manor in Leyendell. So I think it's more like something that Godfrey's would build in Godfrey's time. And also there's statues of Godfrey there. There's also statues of the Crucible Gardener in Stormvale. So that makes sense. Godfrey coming from the era of the Crucible, the hallmarks of his campaigns and his reign are all over Stormvale Castle. I think he built Stormvale Castle after defeating the Stormhawk King. All right, so then, he continues his march down. Somebody else revolts. The person who built Castle Morn, which also bears architecture very similar to Godfrey's creations. Castle Morn is helmed by somebody called the Revenger. That person revolts, and Godfrey defeats him in Castle Morn, and we know because of the sword monument that's right outside Castle Morn. The siege of Castle Morn. A lone hero fights for his vengeance, only to fall at the hand of Lord Godfrey. And then I think Godfrey and his army marched north on Caelid for some reason that we don't know or we don't understand. Lord Godfrey, and this is quantified by the sword monument just outside Caelid as we're heading northeast up that road from where we fight the Tibet Mariner in that village. Lord Godfrey, at last at the end of his campaign, his golden armies unvanquished and unbowed, yet finds grace lost, tattered and faded. This is very close to the site of, I think it's the Third Church of America, where Melina recounts what she said, that America divested Godfrey and his army of grace, making them tarnished. There's kind of a connected statement. It's almost like this statement is made in two places. I think at the Fourth Church of America, down in the Weeping Peninsula, Melina recounts that America prophesied that she would return grace eventually to the tarnished, so they could return to the lands between and fight for the Elden Ring. I think that prophecy is related to some other statues that we see, especially along the Saints Bridge. I think that cloaked figure with the sword that we see standing in a number of places, I think that is the prophesied tarnished who would return to fight for the Elden Ring, because of the places where you find that statue. It's in a lot of the divine towers. It's on a lot of the bridges. I think that's who that's supposed to be. I think that's supposed to be us. Maybe that's worth another video. But anyway, so after they lost the hue from the golden hue from their eyes, they began the long march, leaving the lands between. And we learned of that from Godfrey's remembrance, gained after we defeat him in the end part of the game. When Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was robbed of his grace, becoming tarnished, he took with him his kinfolk and left the lands between. After the long march of the tarnished came to an end, Godfrey divested himself of kingship, becoming a simple warrior once more. So I think while all this was going on is when Marika was trying to run the capital and the Golden Order by herself, but she experienced resistance from the Carian royal family. So where do the Carians and the magicians come from? Well, I've got some other items here, like back at the beginning of the Crucible era. I wanted to track that. I think that this might be the time where astrologers live with and learn from the giants. This is mentioned in a couple of the sorcerers' not incantations, but a couple of sorceries that we are able to pick up. And then at some point, I think that during the War of the Giants, I think that this is quite possibly when the fire giants defeat the ice dragons, when Marika and Godfrey ride north to fight the fire monks. I think that this is when the astrologers would have said, hey, it's not very safe here. It's not very safe to be an ally of the fire giants at that point. So I think causality leads us to assume that the astrologers left the mountaintops of the giants, because we go there in the present day and we don't find them. We don't find any astrologers in the mountaintops of the giants. They became the sorcerers and they relocated. The town of Celia in Caelid is built over the eternal city of Nokron, directly over it. I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that the astrologers built the Siofra well and the Ansel River well. When you step on those platforms, that is sorcery that lights up that platform in blue and takes you down to there's no question in my mind that that's sorcery that powers those elevators in the underground. And I think that those elevators were built by the astrologers who became sorcerers and built the town of Celia. The architecture of Celia is clearly very similar to what you find in the Eternal Cities. The Eternal Cities are made out of some kind of black stone, which they clearly found underground, and Celia, of course, is made out of a white stone that was possibly found in Caelid at the time before the rot spread by millennia. So I think that, I don't know when these events occur. I think that all these events have to occur, though, before the start of these multiple campaigns by the Golden Order. I think Raya Lucaria Academy had to be established and built over the Crystal Cave in Liurnia, which is where we find the Crystallians bosses, and then we can ride an elevator all the way up to the top of the tower. If we go past the bosses, we find an elevator to the top of the tower at Raya Lucaria Academy. So I think that was built long ago by finding that cave and then saying, let's build our academy over this, because if it's over that crystal cave, then we will never run out of glintstone crystal. We'll be able to power our sorceries forever. What I question is, why is that crystal cave there, and what does it represent? Is Liurnia where Estelle crashed in its meteor? Because we find Estelle in that area under Liurnia. I think that's a strong possibility. All right, so back to these campaigns. Marika is bored at home. So the Carian royal family at some time between here and here takes over Raya Lucaria, and the Carian royals will not bow to the Golden Order, which causes the first Liurnian War. Marika needs a champion. For some reason, it's possible that she doesn't want to be seen fighting herself, or maybe she doesn't have the ability to fight. So Marika literally transforms herself into her own champion, Radagon. I do not believe, some people theorize that they were two different people who fused together. I don't believe there's any evidence of that. I believe that Marika, with the powers of a god, could transform herself. We find the Mimic's Veil in Stormvale Castle. We'll mention that later with regards to Godric, but the description of that item says that Marika favored mimicry, that she enjoyed transforming herself to look like other things. So I think she basically created Radagon by becoming Radagon, and I think that his personality formed because Marika maintained the Radagon form for several years. So there's the first Liurnian War, there's the second Liurnian War. These things are mentioned on the sword monuments that you find around Liurnia. And during the Second Liurnian War, the outcome of that is that Radagon performs the miracle at the Church of Vows, and that's where we get the story from Muriel. I don't think Muriel is 100% on the events that occur before that, because some of the things he says. He says that Lord Radagon was a great champion possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these hands at the head of a great golden host when he met Lady Renala in battle. He soon repented his territorial aggressions, though, and became husband to the Carian queen. However, when Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Renala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord. The mystery endures as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Renala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord. Well, I think that assumption of his that a mere champion wouldn't be, a suitable choice for Elden Lord, that almost discounts. It's like he doesn't understand how Godfrey became Elden Lord. Godfrey was clearly Marika's champion, based on the campaigns that he's going around fighting at this, what should be the same time. But anyway, Marika spent these years away from the capital, and during these years, he performed the miracle at the Church of Vows, and because of that miracle, Renala forgave him, and fell in love with him, and the two were wed, as far as I understand, at the Church of Vows. And in the following years, Rykard, Radon, and Rani were born. Well, when that happened, each of them was given a new, I don't know why this happened, but Rani's two fingers pronounces her a new Empyrean. So if Marika is masking herself as Radagon, why did that happen? Because, we're talking about Radagon being Marika's champion. That was his guise in how he basically infiltrated the Carian household and became Renala's husband and had these children together. So then I question when this happened, when she was pronounced two fingers. So I think that it happened. Either these events happened at this period of time, or they happened a little later when Radagon left Rennala and went back to the capital. When that happened, it might be when she was pronounced by the two fingers to be an Empyrean. And that's because, at that point when Radagon left Rennala and went back to the capital, he was named Elden Lord. So that made Rykard, Radahn, and Ranni, all the children that he had with Rennala, those made him Marika's stepchildren and thereby potential Empyreans. So these events might have happened a little bit later. But anyway, when Ranni was pronounced a new Empyrean, Blythe the Hathwolf was given to her as a shadow, and Ranni was also mentored by Renna the Snow Witch and Iji the Blacksmith. We don't have a lot of information about Renna, just kind of little snippets that she tells us. All right, so then we know that Radagon left Rennala for Marika and become Elden Lord. So what caused that? If we go back to laws of causality, what caused Radagon as Marika to leave Rennala and go back to the capital? Well, I think it possibly had to do with Godfrey leaving the capital never to return. He went on the long march. But I think also it had to do with the war against the ancient dragons. So while Marika and Godfrey are away from the capital, Grandsax, the biggest of the dragons, attacks Leyndell. Somebody defeated him, possibly Godwyn. I mean, that's kind of what I have in my notes down here. Who defeated Grandsax? Was it Godwyn? Quite possibly. Grandsax's stone corpse is still there in Leyndell to this day. Like most dragons, it turned to stone when it was defeated. So it's probably too heavy to get rid of or to chop apart. So that began the war against the ancient dragons, which is mentioned in numerous incantations, lightning incantations. And during that war, which I think must have been quick, Godwyn defeated Fortisax and spared him and became friends. And we find proof of that at a sword monument that we find near Leyndell in the Altus Plateau. The routing of the ancient dragons. Godwyn the Golden fought to the last, earning the friendship of Dread Fortisax. So Fortisax and Godwyn became friends, and then Fortisax and Lanciax went to live in the capital with Godwyn. And we have proof of that, and that's when the ancient dragon cult of Leyndell began. And that's when we get the tree sentinels with their lightning magic. That's when a lot of the soldiers, that's why a lot of the soldiers in the Erdtree capital use lightning magic, is because of this recent period where there was war against the ancient dragons, and that's why it's still used to this day. And then I think Lanciax's glaive is an incantation that we can learn in Elden Ring, and the description of that says that Lanciax was the sister of Fortisax. It is said that she took the form of a human to commune with the knights as a priestess of the ancient dragon cult. Lanciax is encountered in the game. That is the white dragon who appears when we emerge onto the Altus Plateau. If we go through the passageway through the mountains from Liurnia, there's like a passageway you can take. You have to fight a magma worm, and then you hit the plateau, and Lanciax just lands and attacks. There's another spot where as you're traveling around the Altus Plateau, Lanciax lands and attacks. All right, so after Marika leaves Rennala and goes back to the capital, this is when the age of Golden Order fundamentalism begins. The lessons that Radagon learned while living with the Carians and the sorcerers, he takes back. And then we start getting incantations that are not based just on faith, but ones based on intelligence. And to help him explore Golden Order fundamentalism was one of his children, Miquella. It was during this time, after Radagon returned to the capital to become king consort, allegedly, that the twins Malenia and Miquella were born. Or were they created? Because let's not forget, Radagon and Marika are the same person. So how does one person give birth to twins? I think they were just created somehow. I think that's what happened. So we have the two twins born. Malenia is born with rot, and Miquella is born with eternal youth. Both of them are afflicted by things, just like Mohg and Morgoth long ago. And I think that these afflictions occur because what America's doing this at this point in time is kind of wrong. It's probably against the greater will. She hasn't necessarily taken a new consort. She is her own consort. And so in order to create these twins, she just has to generate them using her god powers, right? So again, the two fingers pronounce Melania and Mikola Empyreans, but I'm wondering if this is also when a separate set of two fingers became Ronnie's two fingers and named her Empyrean at the same time. Ronnie is given a shadow, but we never hear of Melania or Mikola being given a shadow. And we don't know why that is. Was it Marika's intent that whoever the Empyrean of the New Age would be would inherit Malekith as shadow? I mean, I just don't know. And based on the Shadow of the Erd Tree trailer that we saw, there is a new character called Mesmer, and he speaks to his mother. He addresses to his mother. He asks his mother, why would she appoint one to the throne who was so devoid of light, referring to our Tarnished. And so I think that Mesmer is quite possibly another of Melania's creations, resulting from this period during Golden Order fundamentalism. Mesmer is a bad boy. Mesmer, I think, conspired to burn the Erd Tree because he uses fire magic, which, they went to war with the fire giants. Fire magic is illegal. And I think that maybe Mesmer conspired to burn the Erd Tree, and that's why Leyndell is covered with ash, and that the Erd Tree is now more just like this giant golden thing that only those with the sight of grace, like the player character, can see. Other characters in the game say they can't see the tree, and they can't see the sight of grace, but we as the Tarnished can see it. And so I think Mesmer might have been the one to burn the first Erd Tree and cover Leyndell with the ash that we see there today. So obviously this caused Marika to condemn Mesmer to the Shadow Realm, the place that she had sealed long ago, where she had sealed away the facts of her past and what happened there. And after this, Mesmer was tended to be blasphemous. He's grafted snakes and dragon wings to himself. He's a guy who has kind of taken on sort of a draconic personality. He has the eyes from dragon, communion, which is illegal. You're not supposed to eat dragon hearts, but he has eyes from doing that. He has snakes and wings grafted to himself. So I think that he is like an early version of Rykard, who later allows himself to become a snake. So after Mesmer messes up pretty bad and is sent to the Shadow Realm, snakes are then viewed as traitors to the Golden Order. And in the Colosseum matches around the Lands Between, the gladiators have snakes on their helmet, and smashing the snakes off the helmet was a favorite of the Colosseum matches, as mentioned in some of the Colosseum item descriptions of the gladiators. Rykard takes up Mesmer's cause at that point. I think this is when Rykard begins to look at the culture of snakes and think about blasphemy and becoming a lord of blasphemy. And possibly at the same time, Radahn, a young Radahn, begins studying gravity magic from an Onyx Lord, one of the Onyx Lords who arrive near the town of Celia. I think we fight an Onyx Lord either near or right below Celia. And I think one of those Onyx Lords that we fight is the one who taught Radahn gravity magic. I have a question. I mean, Godfroy and Godric, the twins, the grafting twins, we can call them, they were born probably at some time during this period. They were clearly born before they're adults by the time of the Shattering War, so they have to be born. So back to Mikola and Melania. We've got quite a bit of history of these two based on item descriptions. So from what we can tell from I think this is called the prosthetic wearer's talisman, and this is the blue fairy charm. Melania, who was born blind with the rot, was seen to be afflicted by an outer god of rot. And so that outer god of rot became, after her birth, that outer god of rot became an enemy of the state. Melania, being blind, was instructed to defend herself with the sword by the blind swordsman, who was previously blessed by the blue dancer fairy. And we get this from the Blue Dancer charm, the talisman that we find early in the game. The blind swordsman that trained her also seals away the god of rot. And I think that, the affliction of Melania would have caused this event to occur after she's born. And then we know that Melania resided at the Shaded Castle with the Morelli's family for a while. There are artifacts there that state this, such as the robes, the Moraes robes. The sons of House Moraes are all sickly born. Little wonder that Male Moraes, who we fight in the game, would be so beguiled by the beautiful and fierce goddess who was born into rot. And we see, the clean rot knights at the Shaded Castle. We see like a large portrait of Melania in the Lord's Chamber in the main area. So meanwhile, we also have Miquella developing, and even though he is forever like a child and indeterminately male or female, I believe that Miquella studied Golden Order fundamentalism with his father Radagon and his stepbrother Godwyn. Godwyn is depicted as hugging both Miquella and Melania, so I think that they had a good relationship together in the capital. But by studying Golden Order fundamentalism, I believe that Miquella determined that it couldn't do anything for Melania and her problems. So I think that he turned away from Golden Order fundamentalism and decided to become a champion of those who've been shunned by the Golden Order, like Melania. Because of her rot affliction, I don't think she was allowed to live in the capital, and that's why she had to go live at the Shaded Castle. Pretty bad. All right, so this is probably like the events of 100 or a couple hundred years. All these people live forever. The whole land does. And then Ranni, who has been named a possible Empyrean, kind of finds herself boxed into a certain kind of life as an Empyrean. And so to get out of it, she concocts a plan to steal the Rune of Death and make it possible to kill a demigod. I believe she's assisted by her brother Rykard in this, because Rykard, after Mesmer's example, has taken up the cause of blasphemy. And so this would fit into his new philosophy perfectly. Ranni orchestrates the Night of the Black Knives, and because of this, she rewards Rykard with the Blasphemous Claw. We find that in the item description of the Blasphemous Claw. The Blasphemous Claw is an item that can be used multiple times during the battle with Malekith to kind of prevent his attacks from permanently depleting your HP. So what happened during the Night of the Black Knives is that Numen assassins of the Eternal Cities murdered Godwyn the Golden by carving a curse mark of death on his back, killing his soul but leaving his body alive. We find another part of this, by finding Ranni's body. So actually, maybe this. Yeah, so actually this curse mark that we find on Ranni's dead body at the top of the Divine Tower of Liurnia basically states what happens. This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, 2 demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into 2 half-wheels. Ranni was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. So we've got both of them, having the curse mark carved into their flesh. We can see it in Ranni's back, and we can see it in Godwyn's back during this moment from the opening scenes of the game, when we are being informed of all that's kind of vaguely informed of what happened in the Lands Between while we were gone from the Lands Between as Tarnished. So we learn from the Preceptor Solivus questlines that Solivus has the ability to give people a potion, that he makes a potion that people can drink, and it frees their soul from their body, which Solivus can then put their soul into a doll. And we see that with Sullen's quest and Saluvius's quest in the game. So I think that's how Ranni was put into a doll that resembled her former mentor, the Snow Wish Renna. And I think that's why she introduces herself as Renna early on in the game, because she doesn't assume that we're going to get involved with her cause. She assumes that the Tarnished is there to restore the Golden Order. All right, so because a demigod was finally killed in this manner, demigods are now slain all over the Lands Between. These are the demigods that we find in the walking mausoleums, the ones that allow us to duplicate the remembrances carved into the Erd Tree of our legendary and demigod foes, the bosses that we kill throughout the game. So Godwyn is dead, but not dead. He becomes the soulless Prince of Death. I mean, we don't really know why, like whether Marika was just reacting to this emotionally. It seems unlikely. But Marika decided that her time as a vassal of the Elden Ring was at an end. And she shattered it. Somehow she removed it from her body. Maybe she can only do that inside the Erd Tree where we find her late in the game. And she shatters the Elden Ring. And then we see, these are both from the title scenes. We see that the Elden Ring is shattered. We see little pieces of it flying away. And then we see Radagon, who looks very similar to Marika, by the way, in these photos. So that's literally the game telling you in the opening moments, Marika is Radagon. We see Radagon trying to fix it. And because of what Marika did, we find Radagon's cross-stitch seal across the Erd Tree. So even after we kill Morgott and we have access to the Erd Tree, we're unable to go in it because Radagon has used his interstice to seal off the Erd Tree. And the only way to get inside it is to set the Erd Tree on fire using the Forge of the Giants at the mountaintop of the Giants. Radagon has imprisoned himself and Marika inside the Erd Tree. We find her in there impaled with this red rod. It's unclear who did that. Maybe Radagon did that to himself and herself so that even if Marika transformed back, she'd still be unable to get out of the Erd Tree. I don't know. I'm just theorizing. We really don't know. Maybe we'll find out more in the Shadow of the Erd Tree DLC. So this shattering causes Marika's demigod children to each receive a rune shard. It's, because this happened inside the Erd Tree, it's probably by magical means of inheritance that each of her living demigod children suddenly received this shard. It's something that was transferred them magically or psychically. It's not something that they went and picked up off the ground. But only by killing them can the rune be transferred to us, the Tarnished. So because each of these demigods has their own rune, the other demigods are like, oh, if I collect more pieces by killing my demigod brothers and half-brothers and half-sisters, then I become the new Empyrean. So all these people then began the Shattering War. And because of the Shattering War, the Greater Will said, well, all these demigods basically displease me. And the Greater Will abandons the demigods. And it's at this point that the Erd Tree begins dropping golden seeds to reproduce itself. So think about it. At this point, the Erd Tree is burned. There's ashes around the capital to prove this. It's possible Mesmer did it. We might find out more in the DLC. And so the imaginary tree is actually dropping golden seeds. And it even says in the description of the golden seed that these golden seeds are found at the base of an illusory tree. We find these little glowing phantom trees all over the lands between because these seeds fall there and they start growing these minor Erd trees. Yeah, when the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erd Tree, scattering across the various lands as if life itself knew that its end has come. So yeah, all the minor Erd trees and all these little glowing trees that we find around the lands between, that's just happened since the start of the shattering. So during the shattering, some things happen, and it's unclear what order they happen in, what timeline. I think the Shattering War probably takes a couple hundred years. I think that we need to wrap our heads around that period of time. So yeah, after Godwyn is turned into the deathless Prince of Death, he is a deathless corpse with no soul. His body is taken down, and he is basically begins to grow into the roots of the Erd Tree. And because the roots of the Erd Tree connect to the roots of the Grey Tree, that's why we see Deathroot begin to form in so many places. Like underneath Stormvale Castle, we actually see a replica of Godwyn's bizarre mutated face growing under there. And that's where we see that that one magician is driven through with a death blight spike. So this is where death blight comes from, is from Godwin. This is where the death root begins to spread all across the lands between using the old network of great tree roots. And this is what death root looks like. It looks like piles of bodies drawn into a root, and then also it has an eye, similar to the eye of Godwin. If we look at the description for death root, it even talks about the night of the dire plot, where the rune of death was stolen. The stolen rune of death, previously stolen maybe, enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the rune of death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the great tree, separate from the Erd tree, sprouting in the form of death root. All right, and then clearly this is when we start to have those who live in death. Those who live in death start appearing through out the lands between. They refuse the guidance of grace, according to D, hunter of those who live in death. And that's why we find them everywhere. And we also, if we find the golden epitaph sword, we learn from that description that it is a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwin the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. "O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death." I think referring to Godwin as a brother is Mikola, who has been seen, like I said, there's statues in the Haligtree of Godwin embracing both Melania and Mikola at the same time. I think Mikola crafted this golden fundamentalist sword to try to give proper death to Godwin. I don't believe it worked, though. I think that is also part of what caused Mikola to abandon Golden Order fundamentalism and its ways. It couldn't do anything for Melania, and it couldn't do anything for Godwin. Both of the twins, Morgott and Moog, who had been imprisoned down in the sewers below Landell, because America is sealed away inside the Erd Tree, because the demigods are at war, they can now emerge from the Landell sewers. Morgott exits the capital sewers and claims stewardship of the throne. And meanwhile, I think Radon, who probably suspects Ronnie of the dire plot, he relocates himself in Celia and uses gravity magic to stop this movement of the stars, because he believes that stopping the movement of the stars will stop Ronnie. And that's why it's part of Ronnie's quest that you, as her tarnished champion, should defeat Radon and set the stars back in motion. And I think at this time, during the shattering, is when Mikola understands that the demigods have been abandoned by grace, and this is the perfect opportunity for him to relocate north of the mountaintops of the giants and attempt to grow the Haligtree from an Erd tree sapling using his own blood. And we find his image at the roots when we encounter Melania, waiting there for him to return. But before that, we had a whole bunch of other events, right? We do know that Godefroy and Godric were important players in the assaults on the Altus Plateau and Landell in the early part of the Shattering War. So I have it here that Godefroy and Godric attack the capital but lose. And I'll explain why. In the first defense of Landell Sword Monument, we see that a stubborn alliance rots from within and traces yet remain of a bloody conspiracy. There's also a second defense of Landell, where the fell omen, referring to Morgott, or maybe to Margit, his double, stacks high the corpses of heroes, yet the Erd tree remains unshaken. So yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute, about that ability to duplicate themselves that the omen have. Godefroy is captured and imprisoned in the Altus Plateau Ever Jail. And we know that from the description of the Knight Kristoff. So this is actually a spirit ash that we can obtain during the game. And its description says that after the first defense of Landell, Kristoff earned the hero's honor of Erdtree burial for the feat of capturing Godefroy the Grafted. And we find him sealed in the Altus Plateau Ever Jail. We can defeat him there. And he looks exactly like Godric, grafting and everything. We also have Godric the Grafted, who escaped from his assault on Landell to Stormvale Castle. And the reason he did that is by using a Mimic's Veil of Marika to pretend to be a woman. And we find that Mimic's Veil in Stormvale Castle, and we also learn this whole story from Kenneth Haight, one of the first NPCs we encounter in Limgrave. All right, so this Morgott exiting the capital sewers probably happens at the same time that Mohg duplicates him the same way that Morgott does. So it seems to be the ability of the twins, Morgott and Mohg, to duplicate themselves, because we also find a duplicate of Mohg beneath the capital of Leyndell, down in the area on our path down to the catacombs, where we find that the Great Caravan was entombed, and also the Three Fingers sealed down below Leyndell. That's where Mohg, who during the Shattering inherited the Blood Rune, begins to receive messages from the Formless Mother, or perhaps the Blood Star, or perhaps a combo of those two. And that causes Mohg to leave the capital. He duplicates himself so that he can be in two places at once. He leaves the capital sewers and enters the Haligtree. There's a gate. There's like a teleportation gate that allows us to get from the area near Ordina Town, which is the path to the Haligtree. It allows us to teleport from those fields back to the Mogwin Dynasty area deep below the ground, where Mohg is setting up his new dynasty. And that's one of the ways that we can get to Mogwin Palace, because Mohg was clearly using that teleportation portal to get to those snowfields and to get to the path to the Haligtree, so that he could go find Miquella, who was using his own blood to fuel the Haligtree. Mohg ripped Miquella out of the Haligtree before the Haligtree could fully form. And that's why we see the Haligtree in its current state. And this is one of the images we see during the opening of the game. You see like this tiny little withered sort of body, where I think there's even like traces of blood on the withering. There's like webs, and we see cocoons like this made out of webs throughout the Haligtree. So I think Miquella, being carried here by Mohg, clearly cocooned himself inside a sapling of the Erd Tree to grow the Haligtree. Mohg ripped him out of there, and he takes Miquella back through that portal to the seat of the ancient dynasty and establishes himself as the Lord of Blood, and he establishes the Mogwin dynasty underneath Caelid. During this time, because of this, Miquella abandons his body that Mohg has captured and projects himself to the Shadow Realm, which is where we're going to find him and encounter him in the DLC. Then we have the events, the other events that we know about from the Shattering. Malenia and her Cleanrot Knights began marching south through Liurnia. We find this sword monument in Liurnia that says, "This marks Malenia's southward march. The blade of Miquella and her Cleanrot Knights grant her wings never to be clipped." While marching south through Liurnia into Limgrave, Godric the Grafted challenged Malenia and lost, and fled to Stormvale. And this is another event that we know about from Kenneth Haight, but also the first sword monument that we encounter in the game, in Limgrave. Godric the Golden, humiliated, having tasted defeat by the blade of Miquella, now on his knees, begs her for mercy. And she lets him go. So that kind of adds to Godric's, that and his escape from the capital just adds to the allure of Godric being this coward who hides in women's clothing or mimics himself to get away. Malenia continues, marches over to Caelid and confronts Radahn. Radahn is, of course, protecting Celia at the time and the entrance to Nokron. And Malenia is on this march because she's trying to find Miquella. She wants to know what Mohg did with him, and all the clues point to him taking Miquella down to that area, because that area is directly below Caelid. But that's this marching through, like, she didn't know that you wouldn't get there by marching through Liurnia, Limgrave, and Caelid, that you would have to go through the portal in the snowfields. Obviously, she didn't know about that portal. So instead, she marches herself and her Cleanrot Knights down to Caelid, demands entrance to Nokron, and Radahn's not having it. So the Star Scourge conflict occurs. Radahn holds Celia alone secure, Radon alone holds Celia secure and stands tall to shatter the stars. So that, with that saying, I don't know if he stopped the stars before that or during the Star Scourge conflict. And then we find another sword monument in Caelid talking about how Madlania and Radon fought to a standstill and the scarlet rot blooms. I think we saw this in the story trailer that came out before the game. I think it was one of the E3 trailers. And because of the scarlet rot blooming, Caelid is destroyed and Radon goes mad and continues wandering in the deserts of what is now Caelid. So Caelid clearly was a very different area before those two had their battle there. So all of these events transpire. I think a couple hundred more years pass us by. The greater will abandons the demigods because the demigods are clearly not going to figure out amongst themselves who is the new Empyrean, who's going to usher in a new age. They need assistance. And so the Tarnished return, just as Marika promised, just as Marika prophesied. It's quite possible that she is the one that some magic she set in place before she was shut inside the Erdtree allows them to return. And they can see the guidance of grace for a time, some of them, until they can't. Because either they don't follow the path of grace, or because they make decisions, join factions that they shouldn't have, right? And as we meet these other Tarnished, we figure out which faction they joined, like what happened to them. We encounter some of them in combat. We have to kill some of them. We find their armor or other artifacts, and we find out what happened to them. Some of them go mad. Some of them begin, some of them start following Mogwin, the Lord of Blood. These are all among the Tarnished who return. And they keep returning. We find the Tarnished crucified and hung all over Limgrave, hunted by Godric in the Limgrave area, because that's where they keep emerging to. So Godric kind of takes it on himself to hunt all the Tarnished down and kill them so that they don't come kill him and get his rune. Something clearly happens to create Melina, and we don't know when this happens. It could have been during the Shattering. It could have been a long time ago. Melina herself says that she was created a long time ago in the Erdtree, and that she's forgotten why she was created. And so because of Melina's eye situation, this has led a lot of people to theorize that she was at one point the Gloam-eyed Queen. She doesn't mention that. She doesn't mention using black flame. She doesn't suggest it. She doesn't talk about the Godskins. So I don't think she's the exact person who was the Gloam-eyed Queen, but I think she might be modeled on that person, who was probably Marika's first daughter, and who was clearly burned by black flame, maybe consumed by flames when she died the first time, and that's why when she's recreated, she has all these burns on her hands already. She has the scars of those burns. I don't know when that occurs. That could occur anytime. That could occur anytime from the time that Marika is named Empyrean up to the present. So Melina may have been around a long time. And let's not forget, Melina joins the Tarnished in the fight against Morgott. Why? What'd she have against Morgott? Clearly, Melina had this mission that she was given to find a worthwhile Tarnish, give him Torrent, which was Michelesteed, we found out from the Shadow of the Erdtree promotional materials. And it makes sense. Give Torrent to a Tarnished seeking to become Elden Lord and champion that Tarnished. So I've got kind of her storyline just sort of broken down here because I don't really know what order all these events go in. But clearly the same magic that she used to create Melina, she also used to create the Round Table Hold, which is this kind of astral plane sort of place that doesn't really exist, sort of exists between worlds. Melina can take us there, and is based on the Round Table Hold or actually it's based on the fortified manor that we see in Lanedale. And in that place, in that astral, in that projected, fabricated place, which I think lies within the Erdtree, same as Marika, inside the Round Table Hold, Marika has enslaved Hugh and given him the edict to build a god-slaying weapon. So that's why Hugh is there. Hugh, is someone who mentions being afraid of America, that he knows how terrible she was, and that and that he's happy to build a god-slaying weapon to clear his oath, to clear his debt to America. So that's where we find Hugh and the Round Table hold. We also have this story of Vike, right? Vike is the one who supposedly gets closest to becoming Elden Lord before we do, before our Tarnished does. But however, Vike was swayed, probably by Shabriri, going around possessing different dead people, taking their form. Vike was swayed to accept the Flame of Chaos, the Flame of Frenzy. And then after Vike did that, his Finger Maiden died. What's interesting about Vike, what we find out about Vike in the current age, is that Vike is imprisoned in one of the Ever jails that we find. So there's a version of Vike that is still unblemished, that hasn't accepted the Frenzy Flame, and then we find another version of Vike who invades our world near the chapel, the church that exists near the Frenzy Flame village. That is a head scratcher. Like, how is it that Vike could have gone on to accept a Frenzy Flame if he's imprisoned as a knight in an Everjail? We also know that when the Tarnished return, that Rykard takes up residence in the Volcano Manor and begins to recruit Tarnished to assassinate other Tarnished. We also know that Rykard recruits Lady Tanith, who continues this practice in his stead, while Rykard allows himself to be consumed and combined with a great serpent. Morgott creates a duplicate of himself who goes around challenging the Tarnished, trying to keep them from getting past Stormveil, getting to Morgott at that's Margit. That's who we fight and defeat. And also we know that Moog has abducted war surgeons who possibly were Tarnished, part of the Tarnished army. He recruited them to recruit or kill the Tarnished. And Vare, who we encounter at the start of the game, is one of these war surgeons. And that's when Elden Ring begins, is when we return to the Lands Between. Okay, so a lot to take on. I think the crux of it, if you take anything from this, is that if we line these events up, and we don't line them up, and we try to accept that some of these events occurred at the same time, or maybe occurring at the same time, then I think we start to see cause and effect in the Lands Between, in the storyline that George R.R. Martin created for Elden Ring. So, you may not agree with me. Please, whatever you think about any of the points I've made, especially these events happening at the same time and one causing the other, please post your comments down below. And if you enjoyed this little, discussion, please feel free to click the like button. It really helps the channel out. Thanks a lot. See you again in the next video.